welcome you to Defend Ethiopia Task Force in Europe webinar session. So this webinar is on the topic, or the theme is the role of religion in Ethiopian statehood, and this both historical and contemporary perspective will be presented by our speakers. I would like to welcome you all, but particularly allow me to welcome our speakers, Professor Haggai Ehrlich, Professor Emeritus at Tel Aviv University in Israel, and Professor Jonah Bink, Professor Emeritus, also Professor of African Studies at African Studies Center, Leiden University in the Netherlands. Welcome also to my colleagues at Defend Ethiopia Task Force in Europe and all participants here who are here, committing their time to attend this. But before I go ahead and invite the one who is going to make the opening remark, who is Ato Getawiya Yeherad, who is a chairperson of the Defend Ethiopia currently, I would like to allow me to give a brief background on why we organized this webinar. The webinar is organized in the aftermath of the recent incident on Ethiopian Orthodox Church, in an attempt of splitting the synod, which has had its own conclusion. In this regard, our objective is to highlight the positive role of religion in Ethiopia in the formation of statehood in Ethiopia and their continued contribution in holding the nation together despite the numerous divisive ruling practices Ethiopia has faced in the past. In doing so, we believe that to remind ourselves the history and also which eventually will shed light on the current situation, or at least it will widen our perspective. We also would like to inform you that we have tried to reach Ethiopian scholars from Ethiopian Orthodox Church and Islam, both in Ethiopia and abroad. Unfortunately, they could not make it, some due to time, date inconvenience, and also the fact that it's in the month of Ramadan. But we have learned that there's a great zeal from all to contribute on this topic. So if organized another event, so that gave birth to have a follow-up session on the same topic by bringing also Ethiopian scholars and theologians in the area together with international scholars as well. Nevertheless, I would like to remark that it's equally important and valuable to hear and read the work of international independent scholars on the area who have contributed academically to Ethiopian studies. Tonight, we are blessed with two of those scholars with us. So, dear participants, it's in this spirit that I welcome you again and invite you to this session. That being said, I would like to invite Ato Getawiya Yeherad, the chairperson of Defend Ethiopia Task Force in Europe, to make a brief opening remarks. Ato Getawiya, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mahalet, and good evening to every one of you, and welcome. As Mahalet said, this webinar is recorded, and usually we get more views and reactions on the recorded version. So welcome to everyone here. And thank you, Mahalet, for organizing and initiating this event by itself. So kudos to you, because you did everything by yourself. And to our guests as well, Professor Haggai and Professor Avik, for honoring us with your presence to share your knowledge on this subject. This is a complex subject. I'm not very familiar with it, to be honest with you, but it is my pleasure to welcome every one of you to this discussion on the role of religion in the formation of Ethiopia. Not an easy subject. Ethiopia, as you know, is a country with a very rich and diverse history, shaped by various cultural, political, and religious influences throughout centuries. And through that Ethiopian history, religion has been intertwined with politics and statecraft. The Ethiopian monarchy, for example, which ruled the country for centuries until 1974, derived its legitimacy from its connection with the church. The Siyum, to switch in Amharic for a while. Religion has played a significant role in our history, as we know, the development of the Ethiopian identity and the state formation. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has been the cornerstone of the Ethiopian society for over a millennium. It has played a critical role in the development of the tradition and statecraft, as I said before. The political landscape also has been shaped and influenced by religion to different extent in different periods of our history, particularly in the medieval period. Islam also has played a significant role and had a significant presence in Ethiopia with a long and complex history that dates back to the earliest days of the religion. Ethiopian Islam is unique because it has strong connection with the local cultures as well, and it has played a vital role in the social fabric and the coexistence of the various religions as well. In addition to these major religions, Ethiopia is also home to other faiths, including Judaism, Protestantism, and Catholicism. Each of these religions has contributed to Ethiopia's cultural and religious diversity and has played a role in shaping the country's identity and statehood, which is the subject matter of today's webinar. The role of religion in Ethiopian state formation has not been without challenges. There has been a number of interreligious conflicts, but overall, the positive aspect of religious diversity has been predominant. The country has undergone significant political changes, as you may know, in the past decades. The current constitution, which was adopted in 1995, has the principle of secularism inscribed in it. However, the extent to which secularism as a principle is really in praxis in Ethiopia is a question to address. Religion still plays a significant role in the political and social life, all of the religions. And there has been tensions recently and even in recent history between religion and governance or government or the state. The role of statehood in Ethiopia is complex and multifaceted, the role of religion as well. To what extent the principle of secularism has been embraced by Ethiopia as a polity is still a question. I hope this webinar will shed light on the role of religion, both Christianism, Islamism, and others in the formation of statehood. It's a complex question. We'll have a bit of answer, I hope, in this evening's discussion. I'm sure I will learn a lot, and I'm sure I will learn a lot because, like I told you, I'm not very familiar with the subject, and I hope many of you also will learn from this, from our panelists. With this, Mahalet, I give the floor back to you.
Thank you, for that remark. So, without further ado, we go to our first speaker. So, what we do is first our speakers will present, and then we will have a question and answer session. So we will give time for discussion. Please, in the meantime, those of you who are, who have a time constraint, you can send the question in the comment section, and we will read it, and we will have it, and we will present it accordingly. Yes. So our first speaker tonight is Professor Haggai Early. So please allow me to introduce him. I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce our first speaker. He's whom I can proudly call a mentor in Middle Eastern studies, Ethiopian studies, and particularly about the Nile River, or as we call it, Abai in Ethiopia. Professor Haggai Early is a professor emeritus at Tel Aviv University since 1973 for more than 3 decades. Professor Haggai taught and served as a head of graduate studies in the Middle Eastern Studies in the Middle Eastern History Department at Tel Aviv University. He did his BA in General History and History of the Middle East in this university, and he did his MA in History of Islamic People from Hebrew University. And then he did his PhD in Ethiopian history at School of Oriental Studies, or SOAS, in London. Professor Haggai has published more than, or maybe I'm not sure if it's exact, 23 books and 61 articles. His books are about Ethiopian histories, the Nile Valley and its people, both in the down and upper stream, Ethiopian Middle Eastern studies, religion, Islam, Christianity in Ethiopia and in general in the Horn of Africa. To mention a few, I think those who are interested in the Nile studies have come across, many of us, the Cross and the River, Ethiopia, Egypt, the Nile history, culture, Mises, Islam and Christianity in the Horn of Africa. And his last book, if I'm not mistaken, is Haile Selassie, His Rise and Fall. And there are many more. Aside all the academic stuff, Professor Haggai is also an athlete. He was one of the leading national high jumpers in Israel. Finally, please allow me to take this opportunity to say to him, happy birthday, or Mazal Tov, Professor Early. You have celebrated, I think it's just a couple of days. It's still okay to say happy birthday. And yeah, with that note, I invite you all to this presentation, to his presentation. Professor Haggai, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Malet, also for remembering in the good old days, like 60 years ago, I was representing Israel in high jump. Don't ask about numbers. In any case, I want to share with you some of my thoughts about the role of religions in history. I'm not dealing, I'm just following contemporary affairs, but I'm not dealing with that. Historians should avoid understanding the past from today's perspective. But okay, my thoughts always lead me to 1943. That was the year that Ethiopia was liberated by the British. They controlled Eritrea, and they allowed Haile Selassie, or enabled Haile Selassie, to return to the throne. And there was this issue. The political officers in Asmara, in Eritrea, wanted to annex Tigray to Eritrea, as it used to be under Mussolini, not long before that. The political officers in Addis Ababa were against it. They were for returning everything to the emperor. And there was an argument between the political officers in Asmara and the political officers in Addis Ababa. And one political officer, an intelligence one, his name was Cheeseman, Major, later on Colonel Cheeseman, said or wrote a memoir, a memorandum, I found it in the British archives, that those who do not know Ethiopia really think it is something anachronistic, and Ethiopia is collapsing, and it is something that we can divide, and so on. And he wrote to them, those who don't understand Ethiopia do not understand that there is a mysterious magnetism, I quote the document, a mysterious magnetism that is holding this quote unquote, crazy structure of the Ethiopian empire. And ever since then, I myself, I was intrigued by this beautiful phrasing. What is the mysterious magnetism which holds Ethiopia? The question is wiser than any answer, any possible answer. And today, it is still a valid question. Is the structure of Ethiopia, he said a crazy structure of Ethiopia is going to hold together what is holding it? What is the magnetism which keeps Ethiopia for 2,000 years or somewhat less? And one can provide many explanations and answers. In any case, one is for sure the religious skeleton of the Ethiopian structure, of Ethiopian politics. Ethiopia is a case quite unique in the world in that sense. Until 1974, at least, there was no separation of church and state, like in most other Christian countries. In medieval Europe, the church and state separated and so on and so on. In Ethiopia, Ethiopia was a Christian state until 1974 by definition and by practice. Christianity was the identity of Ethiopia. When I started my interest in Ethiopia, first time I came to the country in May 1970, and then for my doctorate in 1971 too, I felt like delving into a biblical world, that everything practical was sanctioned by Ethiopian Christianity. By the way, I knew very little about Christianity because in Israel at the time, there was like a political approach to avoid anything European or Christian, previously imperialist. And the first time I was reading the New Covenant was because Ethiopia was Christian, and you couldn't understand Ethiopia, you couldn't understand politics, history, without acquainting yourself to the essence of Christianity, and especially to Orthodox Christianity of Ethiopia. So whatever I learned on modern history, Emperor Theodorus and his relation with Abuna Salama, with the head of the church, and the Emperor Johannes, and he's trying to unify the church, and Menelik and Abuna Matthias and Haile Selassie, and everything I was trying to understand was about the religious, Christian essence of society. For instance, I finished studying everything about Haile Selassie and all the politics and intrigue and foreign relations and internal relations and everything political. And then I said to myself, something is missing there. You cannot understand Haile Selassie without understanding that he was a Christian king. Everything around him was about the legitimacy the church enacted to politics. Everything that had to do with the spirit of the country, with the traditional conservative point of the country, had to do with the role of the church and the role of Christianity. And in more positive point of view, The people I met in Ethiopia in 1971-72, they were poor. Some of them were very disillusioned, but there was always hope. The eternity of Ethiopia is there. That religion provides, of course, the conservative, past-oriented element of it, but also hope. And for me, I understood it even better when Mengistu came to power. And Ethiopia, under him, was kind of shedding off Christianity, religion, and so on. And for me, the way I saw it, I came there like 6-7 times during the time of Mengistu. It was Ethiopia losing hope. All the materialistic, non-religious answers were not really answerable to daily life and to hopes for the future. So it depends. If religion is there in a moderate way, and in nearly everything, every political aspect of internal affairs, the church, Christianity, the priests were there to help stability, to have some compromise between fighting and battling camps. Where are those priests today? Where is this hope that belief can provide? Is the magnetism losing this or disappeared? I think that very much the subject of this webinar, the role of religion, and the role of the church, and the role of Christian belief, in the positive, moderate sense, is what Ethiopia needs in order to revive the old magnetism that is very much threatened today, as you all know. So as I look in the past, I think that Christianity was the spirit of the country, the soul of the country, political and everything. And in a very moderate way, I think it's being revived. And I wonder if it will do so. Now, there is another element, of course, important no less than Christianity in Ethiopian history, as it was said already. Muslims are possibly half of the population of Ethiopia. They were marginalized. We don't have time to go into that. Until 1974, the revolution of Mengistu created some equality, but it was equality of misery. But ever since then, Muslims and Islam made it to the very core of Ethiopian lives. I was studying the role of Muslims and Islam in Ethiopian history in external affairs and internal affairs. And like in all religions, things are going back to the early past. And there I'm not the only one, but I used to see the ambivalence of Islam and Muslims towards the Christian Ethiopian state. From the very beginning of Islam, the episode of Muhammad's follower, the first Hijrah, was to Aksum, and the theological Islamic ambivalence about the Christian country. Is it legitimate because it gave asylum to the followers of the prophet and in fact even saved them? Or is it should be Muslim, Islamic, like everything else legitimate? And this dilemma of Muslims regarding Ethiopia, is it the land of the righteous king, the Najashi, who saved the followers of Muhammad, and therefore it should be legitimate, or should it be Islamic? Because the Ethiopian Islamic tradition is that the king himself, the Najashi, converted to Islam. All external affairs, ever since then, every episode that connects Ethiopia to Islamic countries, along the Nile and the Red Sea and whatever, the Middle Eastern and so on, revolves around this Islamic approach to Ethiopia. After 1974, I think that there was this internal tension within Muslims. Can we accept Ethiopia, like the Prophet ordered us in the beginning of the days, or do we have to win in Ethiopia? And outside observers, me included, looking back to the historical past, various episodes, and we were afraid that Ethiopia will be torn by Islamic Christian rivalry. To my good surprise, the issue of Wahhabism, Islamic radicalism, the idea of winning Ethiopia for Islam, and so on, marginalized in the last years. The role of ethnicity is now much more important and dangerous to the magnetism of Ethiopia than the fear that political Islam and political Christianity will collide. Part of the reasons that I think that most Muslims are now proud to be Ethiopians, they participate in the lives of Ethiopia. Maybe it's also had to do with the Arab Spring of 2011 and all the misery inflicted on the Middle East by Islamic radicals. And the idea that in Ethiopia they have a better place to live as Muslims and Ethiopians. Maybe this is one of the reasons, but I'm satisfied just to see the results. That I don't think there is any other country in the world, 50% or something Christians and 50% Muslims, that the issue of political religiosity is not on the agenda that much. That the Prime Minister of Ethiopia can be a son of Ato Ahmed from Jimma. And this is hardly an issue. There are other issues. So my conclusion in looking back to history of everything I learned is that religiosity is a good part of the Ethiopian soul, of the all Ethiopian collective soul. There are dangers in that, but in a moderate sense, Ethiopian Christianity, the role of hope and optimism and mediation and everything that the church and the priesthood provided in the past and the coexistence of Ethiopian Christian and Ethiopian Muslims today give me a ray of hope that the old magnetism that keeps Ethiopia together is being revived and will overcome all the other internal differences of this country that we all love so much. Thank you. Mahalet.
Thank you, Professor Haggai, really for that wonderful historical background to religion, Islam and Christianity in Ethiopia. I really would like, and I think most of the participants here would like to reminisce on the last note that you said, despite everything, religiosity in Ethiopia is a good soul of Ethiopia. I might have rephrased it. But let's just let that sink in. Yeah, thank you, Professor Haggai, for your wonderful presentation. Now we move to our second speaker, and please allow me to introduce Professor John Abink. So I have the pleasure to honor to introduce Professor Abink. He is Professor John Abink is a political anthropologist, historian, and emeritus professor of political anthropology on the history, politics, and cultures of Northeast Africa, in particular Ethiopia. His field research experience is based on ethnographic comparative work on agro-pastoralist people in Southwest Ethiopia, and social and religious history in northern Ethiopia, particularly in Wallo region. His ongoing research is on religion, politics, relation in Ethiopia, sociocultural history of Ethiopia, and further ethnological study of Southwest Ethiopia, Ethiopian ethnic groups, livelihoods, and conflicts. Currently, he supervises a 4.5-year project on Ethiopia, on Ethiopian political and economic reforms since 2018, with several Ethiopian researchers. He is also interested in theoretical and epistemological issues on social science. From 2000, he was special professor of African ethnic studies at the University in Amsterdam. Since 2017, he has been a professor of politics and governance in Africa at the African Studies Center at Leiden University. He published widely in international journals and books. His last book, co-edited with Latowski, was Rhetoric and Social Relations, Dialects of Bonding and Contestation, in Oxford, published in Oxford, New York, 2021. His last paper on Ethiopian history and history writing appeared in 2022 in Cahir's D'études Africaines. Allow me also to add, I was fortunate enough to be a student of African Studies Center at Leiden University, in which he was one of the professors as an Ethiopian. To be taught by Ethiopianists was a great opportunity for me. Professor John Abink, the floor yours. And I left the introduction of your presentation for you. Yeah.
Right. Mahalet, thank you very much for your generous introduction, and also my praise for Professor Haggai for your very interesting approach and your paradigm of magnetism of Ethiopia. Really, it's a nice perspective, and I fully feel and understand what you mean by this reflection. This is beautiful, reflexive retrospect on Ethiopia as a country and as a cultural domain. My presentation will be a bit more geared to, let's say, actualities, the situation, and what people often call crises and so forth. I hate to talk about crisis all the time, but there are some issues in Ethiopia these days, certainly. And I will focus more on a, let's say then, a contemporary anthropological perspective, political anthropology perspective, based on my, you know, my field work in various regions of Ethiopia, and also a kind of more contemporary view. I will refer to history, and we have to refer to history if we talk about the religion state formation in the country, because it provides the background for much of the current problems we are seeing in the country. So I'll talk about some historical lines, and then move to current issues, current arguments, which are seen in Ethiopia's political space today. I want to say that, yeah, I also regret a bit the absence of Ethiopian scholars here, because we are two Ferengis talking about Ethiopia. I feel a bit uncomfortable about that. So let also Ethiopian the Ethiopian audience forgive us for pontificating about Ethiopia, but let's do our best. We speak from a deep commitment to the country, both for Chagai and me. I think we have a abiding interest and deep commitment to that country, and it's amazing history and cultures. So from that aspect, I will try to make some reflections. Obviously, Ethiopia is partly the creation of, or the co-creation of a religious tradition. As Professor Chagai already emphasized, state formation in its early days, since the mid 4th century, was based on an ideology, a religious ideology that contributed to the formation of the highland state. There's no doubt about that. It started like that, it slowly expanded to other areas, and in later ages, especially the 19th century, of course, also before that, the highland state was expanded through either warfare, violence, but also peaceful incorporation of other areas, which made it a very diverse political domain, political cultural domain. We know, of course, that Ethiopia is the land of the earliest forms of both Christianity and Islam, obviously. The 340, 42, the conversion of the Ethiopian emperor, and Islam, as being hosted, the first converts by Muhammad were hosted, of course, in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia has been instrumental in providing survival to these religious traditions in their budding stages, so to speak. And certainly for Islam, this holds very strongly so. But saying that Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, of course, under the influence of the Alexandrine Church in Egypt, has contributed to state formation in Ethiopia, does not mean that from the start local traditions, non-Christian traditions and Islamic traditions have been influential in forging society and state in Ethiopia, in often unacknowledged ways, but nevertheless. So this multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious tapestry of the Ethiopian state has been there basically from the start. Politically, of course, we saw the dominance of an elite formed by Christian and Highland traditions, but in reality there was syncretism and collaboration and cooperation and interaction up to this day. This fact should be really not be underestimated, because it provides for the relatively peaceful, although punctuated by terrible episodes of conflict, but overall a symbiosis of religious groups and cultural groups across Ethiopian history. So that's important to keep in mind. Often it is asked whether religion has been a conflict generating factor in Ethiopia. Also in current discussions about the aftermath of the war in the north, which has been ended by this peace agreement and is being negotiated right now. Often people said, well, Christian nationalism and other things and other religious ideologies have been fueling the war. I think I totally disagree with that. Religion was in itself not a conflict generating aspect in the current problems of Ethiopia. Not at all. There were intersecting interests and intersecting responses by various religious groups on the war, but the rhetoric and discourse of the war from both sides, the federal government as well as the rebels in the north, the TPLF-based group, was not couched in religious terms. So I would almost say on the contrary, because the ordinary believers from both sides had no interest in this war as such, and had no interest in pointing up religious contradictions and religious conflicts. It was more about ethno-regional tensions, as usually in post 1991 Ethiopia. So yeah, religion certainly has been embroiled in conflict, of course. We only have to think of the Ahmed ibn Ibrahim period, early 16th century, the period of Johannes IV in the late 19th century, where the rulers and the armed campaign tried to incorporate religious identity as a factor in the war, and there was forced conversion and so forth, and mass violence. But yeah, these were more, remarkable by their being rare than by being dominant. In the 20th century also, religion was not a conflict generating factor, although it was sometimes coupled with ethnic protest and ethnic revolts, certainly. But as such, religion was not a conflict discourse. And that is, of course, that tunes into what Professor Haggai has called the magnetism of Ethiopia, the ability of ordinary people, being member of different religious traditions, to absorb conflict through the discourse of religious values. And that holds for Orthodox, that holds for Muslims, and that holds also for many other religions, including Catholicism, Protestant, evangelical, and traditional, on the local level, on the level of daily relations, and the level of cultural community relations. And that gives always, that gives also for me the hope. I saw this in practice in many areas. I saw it in the southwest of Ethiopia, where you have more traditional religious people, you have emerging evangelical groups, you have Orthodox and Muslims, and you see it in Wollo, which was the quintessential example of very fascinating and accommodative relationships between Muslims and Christians. So there you see the wisdom of, let's say, ordinary people, ordinary communities, who are able to absorb conflicts expressed in different registers through religion in a kind of manageable way, to kind of neutralize them, so to speak. Obviously, Ethiopia has been a controversial Christian state up to 1974. Undoubtedly, Christianity was state religion, obviously, and it became more and more problematic throughout the 20th century, because there was protest and there was discomfort by the non-Orthodox minorities, during the 1/3 of the Muslims still in Ethiopia, but also smaller minority groups. So in a way, historically, it became untenable for the Ethiopian states to keep Christianity as a state religion. Obviously, it was one contributing factor to the revolutionary turmoil in the 1970s. And indeed, since 1975, first under the Derg and then the Constitution of 1987, and later under EPRDF with the 1995 Constitution, Ethiopia was solidly redefined as a secular state. One might say that the secular state was the price the country had to pay for its diversity, its religious and cultural diversity. There was no other option than to disestablish Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, as a state ideology. There was no other choice. It couldn't be otherwise. So we read in the Constitution, in Article 11.1 and 11.2, the state and religion are separate. There shall be no state religion. And most important, Article 11.3, The state shall not interfere in religious matters, and religion shall not interfere in state affairs. That's also important. So vice versa. There was freedom of religion in Article 27 of the new Constitution of 95, and also in 27 sub 5, it said, it's also important, freedom of to express or manifest one's religion or belief may be subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law and are necessary to protect public safety, peace, health, education, public morality, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others, and to ensure the independence of the state from religion. So here we see that, you know, you can do anything in your religion, but do not try to base political action or activism or whatever on religion and impinge on the public sphere in the name of religion, and thereby try to influence others which are not of your own persuasion. That's an important thing to keep in mind. And the state, while secular since 1975, especially 1995, has had some trouble with that. Everybody knows the big Muslim revolts in the years 2012, 2015. And yeah, also we see it again in the current issue within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, where we have seen a, I think, remarkable, amazing conflict since January this year, where in the Oromia region, 3 archbishops wanted to split off from the main body of the church, you know, trying to get away from the authority of the Holy Synod, the central organ of the Orthodox Church, and form a sub-regional or maybe even ethnic Holy Synod in the Oromia region. Highly controversial against the church regulations. So here we see an entirely new dynamics coming in, which was not anticipated by anybody, and which is potentially very, very problematic. Because, and now I move to the current crisis, because I understand that Mahalet also wants to talk to have us talk a bit about the current problems of religion and state in Ethiopia. So I am not an insider in all the backgrounds of this emerging conflict. I think that it will be overcome. It will not be a real breakpoint in the Orthodox Church. It will not also have a be lasting, I think. But it is a challenge, and while it may be politicized in terms of a certain Oromo faction trying to ethnicize religion, it is also remarkable to see that there is heavy resistance to this, also in the Oromia region and among many believers. It is certainly not a case which is already totally decided or solved, and it will probably the magnetism or the magic of Ethiopian accommodative structures, especially under the aegis of religion, will do their work and will come to a kind of workable compromise. The issue, the basic issue advanced by people was by the rebellious archbishops was the language issue. I'm not sure exactly how they phrased it, but they were complaining about the use of, I guess, Amharic, not Ge'ez, because Ge'ez is untouchable as the religious language, but by complaining about the too prominent role of Amharic language as the language of the church, and that you know, church services should be more done in Oromia and Oromifa language in Oromifa regions, you know, Oromia regional states context. What I saw in various areas of Ethiopia, including Wolaita and in the southwest, is that the priests officiating in the services already use the local language in most contexts. The sermons are in the local language. In Oromia, the same. What they do not translate, of course, are the Ge'ez prayers and the Ge'ez rituals and so forth, because that is the unifying body of the ritual text. But the sermons and the discussions after the prayers and the liturgy and the songs are in the local language. I'm not sure how far that is the case also in Oromia region, but I think to a large extent. So it's a bit puzzling why this issue has come up. Anyway, I'm not going to go into details because I don't know them, but what seems to be the case is that we might have a somewhat worrying precedent that the church is influenced by politics from certain groups which want to advance a certain agenda. The interference by the federal government in the person of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has been prominent. He has tried to mediate. He's tried to let people address the issue. I am not sure if he has played a very decisive role here. I mean, first of all, he said it was a purely internal matter. He didn't want to comment, although there were national laws to regulate religious relationships with the state. Otherwise, there have been interchanges between the insurgent archbishops and the body of the church, the Holy Synod, to solve the problem. I'm not sure if it is solved, but there is something going on in the church, and it is not a fruitful way to solve religious issues in Ethiopia. As I said before, I think this big challenge which we see in the church is going to be dealt with, not in the least probably by lower ranking religious people, officiators, as well as by the believers, and they will probably try to and be successful in accommodating the issue of the so-called differences, linguistic and cultural and otherwise. And let's hope for that. This conflict may seem petty, this conflict about language issues in certain areas, but it was at some point posing a danger to the unity of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and to a proliferation of sub-regional synods. But I think the absorptive capacity and the problem-solving capacity of the church will prevail, precisely because they are not interested in politics. They are not motivated by political issues. If there's one if there is one societal register or discourse which can stay away from politics and can unite people beyond such political differences or ethnic difference, it is the church. The same goes for the Muslim identity, for the Muslim community, which is also trans-ethnic and trans-regional, as well as also increasingly for the Protestant evangelical communities. They provide a discourse, a register, a cultural register, which can unify people and bring them together, also in the national sense, and that probably is the hope we can have on the role of religion in Ethiopia. Again, it shows that religion is very deeply rooted in the identity of people in the country, but in a diverse sense. But this diversity, is not, to my opinion, felt as divisive by ordinary people. They just see the difference, they respect differences, they don't want to point it up as political issues, but they want to develop and work with mechanisms to accommodate diversity in local communities. I think that is still part of the societal magic of Ethiopia, that this can be maintained. I think I'm not going to extend my talk much more about this. I think it's what I see as this conflict in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is important to pay attention to. It's highly important to manage it properly, also from the side of regional state governments and the federal government. But I trust that with the pressure from below, from ordinary believers and from the officials of the church, that it can be solved. So to be brief, religion is constitutionally separate from politics. Religious life, community life based on religion. Think of all the Mahabharats and the other religion-based civic institutions, is a unifying factor which is not interested in politicization. And let us hope it stays that way, because it will contribute to the durability and to the survival of the Ethiopian polity. And I hope thereby that social peace can and will be kept in the country. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Bing, for that really wonderful analysis on the current situation, of course, backed by a historical perspective as well. Now we go to the question and answer session. Before I open that, we have been given enough background with the historical analysis of religion in the state form, in the statehood, in Ethiopian statehood, and also the situation, the contemporary situation by Professor Abing, and the historical one by Professor Haggai Ehrlich. We do have some questions here. I asked it in the chat section. So please mute. I'm sorry about that. I have asked. I do encourage everyone, if you have a question, to place it in the chat section. But I have some questions for now here. It's from Gabra Hewitt. The question is for, I think it's for Professor John Abing. It reads as, religion may not have played a conflictual role or conflict-generating role in the Tigray war, but how does he see the accusation that both sides used loyal religious institution to mobilize troops and maintain society on a war footing, with some clergy being involved in spreading propaganda or seeking political goals for one side or the other? I'm just checking if there's another question, but I do have also one question to Professor Haggai Ehrlich, that you mentioned that mysterious magnetism, perhaps our difference in previous times was mostly regional differences, and yes, religion has played a great role in unifying the country, despite that regional difference. But now, in the past decades, Ethiopia has faced this tribalism problem, ethnicity, and with that, do you think still religion will play a great role in unifying the country? Because, for example, I know that you said you are not following the current issue, but the current incident that Ethiopian Orthodox Church is allegedly, it has it's something related with tribalism, allegedly. So that's my question to Professor Ehrlich, and then I will leave you now. So maybe we start with Professor Haggai, and then Professor Abing will continue. You are muted, Professor Haggai. Did you mute yourself? Please unmute. Okay. Yeah, it's okay now.
I don't trust those electronic devices. We have a very bad dialogue between us.
Noted. Okay. But over to you, Professor.
Allow me to stay safely an historian and look in the past. Like from today's perspective, the collision between Tigrayans and Amhara, in the past there were major issues that the priests interfered, like in 1878, Johannes and Menelik, and then 1889, the Tigrayans were about to invade the Addis Ababa. The priests came and said, no, 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 we are brothers and so on. And they diverted Johannes to fight the Sudanese Mahdiya. And it comes time and again in history that the church and the priesthood played a very positive role in internal affairs in that respect. I'm not sure that today they are having the same standing in society. Religion is now more, as Professor Abing pointed out thoroughly, is more localized. And I don't know if it is a positive or a negative phenomenon. Religion can be radicalized and militant and can be soft and accommodating. But on the whole, talking about the magnetism that holds Ethiopia together, I don't see religion now a practical skeleton, so to speak, of Ethiopia. But I can't make any valid point about very current affairs in that respect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You answered it safely. I understand, Professor Haggai. So now, yeah, Professor John Abing.
Yeah, the question I'll ask later. I will comment a bit on what Professor Haggai said just now. Yeah, religion. I think religion in Ethiopia has changed the position of religion, obviously, across the regimes, but it is still enormously important in terms of the patterns of meaning it creates among the population. This will not change. The previous two governments, and now perhaps also this one, post 2018, have done their best to politicize religion, to contain it, to put their own leaders in charge, to make it subservient to non-religious political aims. That has been resisted, basically. I mean, despite the naming of certain top leaders of the church being more on the hand of the government and so forth, the ordinary believers and the staff of the church, the religious officiators and so forth, the hierarchy, has tried to stick to the core function of religion, which is provide guidance, spiritual inspiration, orientation, meaning to the believers. And this is really I think, in terms of what I see in my anthropological fieldwork, what I saw in my anthropological fieldwork, this is the core value which Ethiopia attached to religion. It's an anchor, a non-political anchor of life, of meaning, of relation to the transcendental, to the supernatural, which nobody can touch or destroy, because it's of God and of not of the sovereign, not of Caesar, so to speak. And that will remain. That will always be a tension, but ultimately that will be the social cultural fabric of society among Orthodox, among Protestant evangelicals, among the Muslims, to stick to that and to resist politicization. That I think that will continue. There is no more overarching religious logic which applies as it did in the imperial time to all Ethiopians in the same way, or as a frame of reference, as being the dominant frame of reference, like Orthodoxy was before 1974. But the religious register as such will remain important for all Ethiopians, and will be a kind of, let's say, societal, cultural buffer to make life and to make political problems manageable for the people. There was a question about, I'm not sure exactly what it was, I don't see it in the chat, but if the question is about what about the mobilization of people for the war effort through religious institutions, if I'm right, I think that's not at all the case. It didn't happen at all. Religious institutions like churches, like mahabars, like mosques and so forth, were not used for mobilization for the war efforts. As such, religion was not a mobilizational frame. What was mobilization was the national frame, defense of the sovereignty and the nation as it was. I mean, against an insurrection by an armed group, which was largely seen by 80% of the population of Ethiopia as illegal. That was the thing. And there, in that register, the national register, regardless of religion, because both Protestant evangelicals, Muslims, Orthodox, all ran to the defense of the country and its sovereignty. That was the only frame of reference which was relevant. Not as such the instrumentalization of religion for nationalist purposes.
Thank you, Professor Bink. We have more questions. Some of them, they come directly to my, it's a direct message to me on the chat section, so I have to read it. So we have another question to Professor Haggai. It reads as, in relation to Ethiopia's growing rapprochement in recent years with countries in the Gulf and Turkey and their growing interest in the Horn of Africa, what challenges and opportunities do you see? And sorry, Professor Haggai, let me just read also the other one. It's this one probably can be, I will make it open for both of you. Recently, we have come to observe that the challenge on Orthodox religion is not only the issue in Ethiopia, but global. Recently, we have seen similar trend in Ukraine. Observing these current issues, can we say that there is something going on globally to subdue or probably challenge the teachings and reform it? So, Professor Haggai, you may start, please.
Well, 2 points. One, in continuation to what John Abig just said, I come and go out of Ethiopia every 2-3 years, and as an outside observer, I can feel the atmospheres changing. The first time I came to Ethiopia in 1970, there was only one mosque in Addis Ababa, built by Mussolini. Nowadays, there is the number of mosques and the number of churches is the same, and they are very vibrant in religious life of the public. I agree, there is a revival of religiosity with the hope that it gives to people, which is very, very positive. So internally, I hope that this revival of non-political religiosity, but spiritual, that's something essential that the country needs more than everything materialistic. On the role of religiosity in external affairs, mainly with Middle Eastern and Islamic countries, again, it's Ethiopia is now accepted in the Islamic world as a legitimate neighbor. But the key of religiosity in that respect is lower. For instance, the #1 issue now over the Nile and the Renaissance Dam and the Egyptians, even though there was an Islamic government, Muhammad Morsi in Egypt and so on, and Muslim brothers tried to evoke anti-Ethiopian, all the Islamic radicalism, it didn't work. The problem is there, it's between the two countries. but Islam and Christianity used to be very much a pivotal factor in Ethiopian Egyptian affairs. And now when you have the Nile issue, it's not that much a matter of religiosity and conflict. For instance, in 2015, the Ethiopian Abuna came to Cairo, and the two Abunas, they talked together about facilitating dialogue and so on. Well, it went nearly unnoticed. But on all, this is a good word, that there is hardly an Islamic Christian negativity, conflict spirit in the relations of Ethiopia with the Middle Eastern world. In some cases, it's even a bridge. If you allow me a word about Judaism in Israel, we have now 150,000 Ethiopians. And if there is anything left of the good relations that were in the past, it's much due to this Judaic connection. So on the whole, it's in the same spirit that we spoke. Religiosity became less political, also in the external affairs of Ethiopia with Middle Eastern countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Haggai. Professor Abink, over to you, please. You are muted, Professor Abink.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have much to say about these issues because Professor Haggai is the expert on that, especially on the issue of the international relationships and the changing relation between politics and religion in the international aspects. So I'm not sure what I can add here. I think not much. In international relations, as we see them developing in the Red Sea Basin area, I see pragmatism, and I see de-emphasizing of religious identities in international relations, and also alliances between countries are not based on religious affinities anymore. They are more based on economic interest and pragmatism than on cultural affinities. So I think that is in itself a good sign.
Thank you, Professor John Abink. I do encourage, if anyone has a question, please to forward them. I do have some questions here from somebody who attended and left because of time constraint. I will read it here. What effects do ethnic conflicts have on religion? We can take the current situation of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. That is one. This is to Professor John Abink. Number two, as a person who is currently supervising research on Ethiopian politics and economic, starting from the reform time from 2018, do you see any relationship between the Prime Minister Abiy reform and the situation with Ethiopian Orthodox Church?
Oh yeah, wow, important questions. The first one, the influence of ethnicity on religion and on religious conflicts. Yeah, well, in the obviously in the latest EOTC misery, I mean conflict in the church, there is the rebellious bishops, archbishops, Abba Sauros, Abba Zina Marcos, and Abba Eustatios. They were from the Oromo region, apparently, and they advanced claims about, please let us extend the use of Oromifa language in Orthodox Church services. And I think the Holy Synod of the Orthodox Church, the central organ, was not against that, but they were against the consequences which the three archbishops drew from their demand, namely independently, away from approval by the Holy Synod, appointing 26 bishops in churches in the Oromia region. Of course, according to church law, it should be approved by the Holy Synod, and they didn't do that. So that is why did they do it? I mean, that's a question everybody wants to ask, and of course there are commentators who say, yeah, this is the impact of political ethnic agendas behind the scenes, who want to influence more and more autonomy, also political autonomy of the Oromia regional state. That may be true, it may not be true, I'm not sure, but there is so. But anyway, what we can conclude is there is an impact, an influence of the ethnic discourse of ethnic autonomy and ethnic self-determination ongoing and increasing, even in the Orthodox Church, and that is highly surprising and highly puzzling. I mean, if not worrying, it's not necessary, because it has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with the core tenets of the faith. The demands of using Oromifa in church services, in the sermons and in other things, fine and great. I mean, nobody would be against that. Even the Orthodox Church, the Holy Synod people said, we have work to do on that. We can expand we can expand the use of the language, of course, if people want that. But it should not lead to illegal, what they say is illegal appointments of bishops without the authorization of the Holy Synod. That's that simple. So definitely, to conclude, there is an impact of a non-religious ethnic agenda on religious issues. And I would advise, who am I to advise, but I would say this is not a good development. I mean, you should keep the unity of the faith, because the faith is the same for all people who believe in the Orthodox religion. So you should not mix that up with politics, obviously. The second one, I forgot, I must say. Mahalet, could you repeat the second point?
Let me unmute myself. The second one was the relation between the reform since 2018. Do you see any relation with the current situation? Of course, the problem or the attempt.
Well, you know, the reform agenda, which as announced by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed in 2018, was especially on three issues: resetting international relations of Ethiopia in the wider region, with Eritrea, with Somalia, and with Sudan. And there he did okay. There was secondly, democratize the political arena in Ethiopia, so be more inclusive. And we have seen that it has led to the invitation of all these rebel groups and so-called outlawed political groups back into Ethiopia to be part of the reform process in terms of democratizing and opening up the political spectrum. That was also initially very successful. And thirdly, liberalize, open up the national economy. So make it more competitive, invite foreign investors, cancel all kinds of restrictions for the entry of foreign parties on the Ethiopian economic scene. And there it has been partly successful only because the process has stalled a bit. So this is what we looked at in that project. How is foreign direct investment faring? What are the bottlenecks seen in the practical implementation of reform issues in the various regions, mainly Oromia and Amhara region? How is the relationship between citizens and authorities being reset? Do citizens have more confidence in the reforms, in the implementation of the reforms, like through citizens' charters, through women's empowerment and so forth? This is what we have looked at. And there are some encouraging changes, and there is a whole new field of discussion emerging, and these things are all discussed and without political censorship and so forth. So it's in progress. It is not definite in terms of results. There are some results, but they have not been carried through. And they have been blocked by, of course, by the economic crisis and by the war, this devastating war, which has done so much damage also in terms of destroying infrastructure, educational facilities, livelihoods, billions and billions of dollars of damage. And now reconstruction is ongoing as first priority rather than addressing all these new policy initiatives. So, yeah. And then if we look at the effect of the reform agenda as far as being implemented on ethnic relations and on religious relations, I can't say much about that. I mean, there is no direct effect on either aggravating or improving them, but the reforms, no doubt, were all warmly encouraged by people and by the let's say the target population. And I hope that conditions stabilize, that the economy is picked up again, partly also via international donor support, which was promised, but which was for political and often misguided reasons stopped. Think of the AGOA, the Americans stopping the AGOA agreement with Ethiopia for no convincing reasons. That these things are being picked up again, so that Ethiopia can, do a serious job in wealth creation, in political reform, in employing people, so that other issues can also be tackled. That's the main challenge we have now in the country.
Thank you, Professor John Abing. Indeed, that's really a relevant question for those of us who are interested to understand, what's happening or what happened, we can say, in Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The recent attempt to split the synod. Now I will go and give a floor to Dr. Amsalu Tefera. I see him, he is here with us. He has been one of the people whom that we asked from Ethiopian Orthodox Church to present, to be part of this webinar as a speaker, but due to time constraint, he needed time to prepare, so he couldn't make it, but he blessed us with his presence here. Dr. Amsalu, I hope you are listening. Unmute yourself, and the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mahalet, for hosting this, and thank you for inviting me. I would like to thank both presenters, Professor Hagai and Professor Johabing. And I apologize for I was unable to join earlier, and I couldn't even attend the entire session. I just joined at the end of the Q&A session due to my work schedule. So I apologize for that. And this is really very important webinar, and the impact of your presentations and your scholarly expertise, and presentations are really highly appreciated, especially at this time. So personally, for me, as a young, so to speak, as a young Ethiopianist, so I have read most of the articles of Professor Hagai and Professor John Abing, especially Professor Hagai. So I really appreciate to attend your lectures and the presentations even today. But I was unable to hear you fully. So I'm not sure whether my points are already mentioned in your presentations or by the Q&A session, but I would like to emphasize. I have just quick questions for both professors. Professor Hagai, I wonder, I know your expertise, I know you are one of the authorities on religion, politics, and everything related with Horn of Africa, especially in Ethiopia. I know. So coming to this and considering all your expertise, I would like to hear your your advice. Do you see currently in Ethiopia we see okay, even though the state says that the state and the church are separate entities in theory, but we see lots of highly religious mentalities are just practically orchestrated by.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? I couldn't hear you well, Mahalet. I'm sorry.
Sorry, please continue.
No.
For one
Okay,
second, you were unmuted, but now it's okay.
Yeah, there was a phone call, so it was just interrupted. Okay, sorry. So, Professor Haggai, do you see any religious-based impartiality in Ethiopia against the Orthodoxy, especially but the PP party, you know, the prosperity? Even though the state is not just clearly or officially declaring that Ethiopia is currently under prosperity religion, but they are just doing in that favor. So what we feel is that, so you as an expert and as an as an outsider, expert. So do you see any religious fundamentalist approach by prosperity a gospel-based religion in Ethiopia? This is what I see, and this is why, as a result of religious, minority, for obvious reasons, this time Ethiopian Orthodox Church become a victim from different aspects, from different angles. So this one of the reasons is just as it was mentioned, the recently affected the Oromo bishops led, enthronement, even though it was just currently pending. I would say pending, because it may recur again after a while. So in that case, it's just the agenda is behind. So do you see that there is any problem in that? So this is one thing. Another for Professor Jonabing. So do you see any ethnicity is obviously in Ethiopia as currently obviously seen. So there is, in Ethiopia it is obvious to live with different religious background, with a different religion and ethnic background with no problem. But recently, after the EPRDF just emergence, so it become one of the hardest, honestly speaking, even the religious coexistence and living coexistence and peacefully become problematic. So do you think, do you see any advice to avoid, to be cleansed from, to be healed from this kind of problem for Ethiopians as a whole? So free from, ethnic problems, ethnic based controversies and enmities, to live. So, for example, we see that even in the military, we see this ethnic problem even become a problem for even for the military. So you can imagine how serious become the problem is. So it affects everything. It affects the church, it affects the military, it affects the civilians, and it affects even the civil workers and professionals, even students, university students, and others. So what's your advice? So thank you very much, and I would like to thank once again for your time. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Amsalu. Although we didn't have the opportunity to have you as a speaker, but we are happy you made this. You made it for a few minutes to attend this. Thank you. And yeah, Professor Haggai, over to you. Let's start with you.
About the contemporary issue that Dr. Amsalu raised, I really invite John to speak about it, because I really know very little about it. I want to make two points. One about giving advice. that I was asked. Back in 1990 something, I don't remember the year, I had the chance to meet with Mele Zenawi. And I told him on my own that the bones of Emperor Haile Selassie should be buried in a state funeral because Ethiopia needs appeasement. And he listened to me carefully and said, no. And at the end, Haile Selassie had a sort of church funeral, not a state funeral. And that was a major failure. I was trying to offer my advice, but it was not answered. But I want to, every coin has many sides, not only two. Mele Zenawi was quite a self-assured and self-admittedly an arrogant person. And surely he and the TPLF at the time, they failed to appease Ethiopia. But this is one aspect of the coin. The other one is that I deviate from the religious aspect. The central hope that Ethiopia is having for the future is anchored in the Renaissance Dam. This is perhaps number one issue on the future of economy and hope for Ethiopia. And the way I saw it, it took the personality of Mele Zenawi to initiate and fulfill the idea of a dam over the Blue Nile. But in the year 2000, the World Bank defined the waters of the Blue Nile as number one resource of Ethiopia. But it went unaddressed by Mengistu and Haile Selassie and Menelik and everyone before that. So he took the revolutionary, he said, I am arrogant. So I follow this word of the TPLF period in leadership to build what is a ray of hope for the future of Ethiopia. So we should not forget that. But they failed in appeasing the spirit of Ethiopianness. And I mentioned especially this case of the funeral of Haile Selassie as exemplifying this unfortunate failure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Haggai. That was indeed interesting to have that first-hand historical account. Yeah, thank you. So now we go to Professor John Upping. I hope you have heard the first question, although it was directed to Professor Haggai. Do you want the person to briefly repeat it?
Well, it's about wanting advice about how to deal with this apparently looming ethnic impact on religious life, especially on the EOTC, of course.
Yeah.
That is the
Okay.
issue. Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks, Professor Haggai has given good insights into the background and also into some kind of mistakes made by previous Prime Minister Meles. I mean, he should have, of course. Anyway, let me be brief about this issue about the church. I mean, what we see is clearly a relationship between ethnicity politics, and religious life, and that should be resisted at all costs, because religion is not about politics, it's not about ethnicity, it's about, you know, values around the worship of God and you know, building a life in the spirit of rules given in the biblical and Quranic traditions. And that should be central, not politics. The fact of the the fact of the demands advanced by the three archbishops in terms of, you know, enlarging the role of Oromifa language in church services, I think the church should immediately grant that. Of course, if believers want to have you know, a larger role within the church of Oromifa in various issues, do it, of course, because it's a secondary issue. The main issue is to keep the doctrinal and value consistency of the church as a whole for all Ethiopians, be they Wolaita, Sidama, Ongota, Amara, Tigray, Sidama, you know, Oromo, whatever. So grant the demand immediately, but what should not be, what cannot be tolerated, according to the tenets of the church itself, of course, is that archbishops start appointing people without the consent of the central organs of the church. I mean, they made a big mistake in while advancing their demand for language rights within the church services, to appoint 26 bishops. This is, of course, I can understand that. What the religious doctrinal motivation for that is. There were none. But I would say, you know, in the tradition of the church, embark upon serious mediation and in good faith. The church is good in that. It has solved many problems across its history by quiet and patient negotiation on the basis of shared tenets of the faith, and this can also be done in this case. But to be brief again, when it's about language rights and the right of preaching and practicing the religion in the local language, do it. Of course, it's not a theological issue. It's a practical issue. So immediately accord that and keep the unity of the church in terms of the value unity you have for the people as a whole, in whatever region or ethnic group they are. I would say that as a kind of advice, if you allow me.
Okay, so with that, should I assume you kind of combined both questions and addressed it?
I think so.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think, let me see if we have more questions. But I did receive a comment, or rather like a concern. This is to Professor Haggai, when you mentioned about GERD, or the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. I also, you know, that I did an interview with you maybe a year and a half ago, very good interview, based on your writings, your books online. But there's this, I don't know, that's what I noticed, and maybe now also when you mentioned, do you think the credit of, again, this is a bit of off topic, we Ethiopians seem to find when it's not religion, you know, finding that magnetic center that unite us, so every Ethiopian is now excited about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It is a generational project, which was started ideally by Emperor Haile Selassie. I think idea was also present, as we read from history, around Emperor Menelik time. Then he did erect it or started it, but also there is for a short period Prime Minister Haile Mariam, and for much of the construction to go on and, you know, give it that national sense with the current regime. If I am mistaken, correct me. Do you think that much of the credit goes to Prime Minister Meles, the late Prime Minister Zenawi? What's your view? Just to clarify.
Well, I studied it carefully. The idea was there from immemorial times. But Menelik promised the British he would not interfere with the Nile waters without consulting them. And Emperor Haile Selassie avoided the subject other than inviting the Americans to make a survey. And they presented like 12 volumes of survey and they put on the shelf, and Haile Selassie did nothing about it. Now, Mengistu only threatened the Egyptians that the Soviets would come and take revenge on them, on the Egyptians, by building another Aswan in the Nile for the Ethiopians. Mengistu can make only wars, not construct anything positive. Meles took the volumes from the shelf. Not the first thing that he did. But he started thinking about it and studying it, and only in 2010, secretly, Ethiopians started planning, building the GER, the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, in the place that when American recommended it should be. Prior to that, the British wanted the dam for the whole Nile system on Lake Tana. But where it is now being erected, that was the initiative of Meles personally. He was a very daring person. And he did it against, in fact, the entire world, with resources coming from the Ethiopian people. But the initiative and daring was his, and credit should go where it due in that case.
Okay, I'm sure we'll get a lot of comments about that. But yeah, thank you.
Malet, I'm sorry. I'm in the profession of not making history according to opinions. You're making history according to finding the facts and try to understand the connection between them. So any claim that there was anything before that, Haile Selassie went to Cairo to disconnect the church relations exactly when Nasser started building the Aswan Dam. And he swallowed the pride because he was very much caring for the Organization of African Unity and so on and so forth. Haile Selassie was the greatest Ethiopian of the 20th century, but he was not the one behind the Blue Nile Dam. It's not a matter of opinion. If you have another opinion, show me the fact.
Thank you. No, noted. But I was curious. But again, I took the liberty as a host here to bring that out of curiosity. But again, please understand, dear audience, also it's finding that center, as it is said. I'm sticking with that phrase: mysterious magnetism as religion has served being that center for Ethiopia for many years. Now, back to our original topic of religion. The time is, we have actually really few minutes, but I'm going to still, it was up to 10 o'clock. We are at 58. We do need, that concluding word that we have to take. We have here great historians, both historically and on contemporary issues. So related to that, in terms of overcoming such events, what happened on against or in Ethiopian Orthodox Church or within Ethiopian Orthodox Church, how should what is your advice for the people of Ethiopia? This I would say. Let's kick it with Professor John Abin.
Advice. Sorry, I feel difficult. I feel awkward to give advice to anybody, especially on Ethiopian issues, to Ethiopians and so forth.
Based on your research as a person.
Yeah, what I observe is that Ethiopia has, in the past 30 years, made radical change in its political dispensation. Ethnicity has become important in the sense that it has been recognized, which is very right, and because it is factually, in fact, a multi-ethnic country, and no ethnic group should be devalued against any other group, obviously. The political translation of the ethnic diversity has been less than successful, as we have seen lately in the terrible Northern War, and also still ongoing in Western Ethiopia and Wolaga and surroundings. It has not been a successful formula, and it is not a durable formula. It has generated huge conflicts, so it should be addressed. But then we also see sometimes stirrings of religious conflicts. The one which partly gave rise to this seminar, this webinar, namely the troubles in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, I hope they do not forebode religious conflict in the country. That should to be avoided at all costs. I mean, the ordinary believers and communities know that, and they don't want it. Because if religious conflict starts to erupt in Ethiopia, it would pale ethnic conflicts. So at all costs, there is responsibility on the religious leaders, but especially also on the political leaders and the political activists from all kinds of backgrounds, not to instrumentalize religion, because what keeps Ethiopian society across all its varieties and diversities together is the shared piety and religious orientation that gives meaning to life and that builds bridges across communities. The social fabric of Ethiopia is not politics, but it's religious culture, and that should be maintained. It will be maintained if you leave the people alone and in living that and in constructing and maintaining that. And that would be, you know, my hope for the country. Keep the religious infrastructure, the religious social fabric in place, because that is what keeps the country together and provides positive inspiration to people to maintain relationships, to work together, and to give fulfillment to life and to improve lives. So that would be my observation.
Thank you, Professor Jonah Binks. The same question for a last word will go to Professor Haggai. I just received this question, so probably you may combine it. It says, how does the presenter see as a way forward for reconciling the Orthodox Church and the government for it to make a contribution to the building of Ethiopian nation? Professor Haggai.
Well, giving advice to others, it's always easy, but mostly futile. What I hope I contributed, as John did, is to provide history in the more professional, more objective as possible way. And for the Ethiopians, and by the way, I do it mostly for the Beta Israel, the Ethiopians here in this country, they know very little about their past. But Ethiopia has a long history, which is one of the main resources for building the future, to learn and study the past with its negative aspects and positive aspects. It's a big resource that today, unfortunately, all over the world, it's not only in Ethiopia, even in my seminars in Tel Aviv, one day I said that the Battle of El Alamein was in late 1942. So one student said, okay, this is your opinion. We are living in a period that everyone knows everyone, and ignorance is there. So my advice is to learn history and find the inspiration from the past. In the Jewish Torah, it's saying on that turn to it and turn to it. Everything is there. If you want to be a fascist, you have the phrases there. If you want to be liberal, it's there. Everything is there. But this is a resource of wisdom. An Ethiopian past, this is something that should be learned and studied. This is my advice. How to go from there? You know, Haggai is the first book in the minor prophets. I am just a minor prophet, if at all. So I don't dare giving advices, apart from studying the past and be learned, be knowledgeable about and know what you are talking about. This is the thing that, this is my advice. Mahalet.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Hagai. Yeah, I know there will be something to say, even if you resist to say, I don't give advice. I mean, from experience, you both have given us, definitely that's what is needed right now for us to learn from our past, because we all do know that religion is they do have both religions, Christianity, Islam, in a great contribution, a positive one, and there might be negative one. But in in bringing that unity in the country, so in the time in trial times like this, it's really important to look at our history and learn from it. And I'm happy, I'm sure, as well as my colleagues and my fellow Ethiopians here, to, in spite of everything, to hear the, a pessimist, you're pessimist, and you're hopeful. So hopefully the Ethiopian government and both scholars here of the church will take that note. Having said that, I will invite for a brief concluding remark, Ato Ketao, my colleague, a chairperson of the Defend Ethiopia task force in Europe. Over to you, Ketao, please.
Well, thank you, Mahalet, for giving me back the floor. I would not dare to make a summary of what we heard this evening. It was very insightful and educational. At least for me, it was. As I told you earlier, this subject is a little complex, very timely, and having very educational insights from scholars like Professor Hagai and Professor Abnik was really very interesting for me. We have spent 2 hours, as you said. So Mahalet, again, thank you for organizing this webinar. It will have a follow-up, I presume. I heard you say that we need to have an Ethiopian perspective from inside on this multifaceted and complex subject. And we had also the honor of having Dr. Amsalu today, who intervened, which was, he asked a very interesting and not easy to answer question. And we hope that we will have a different perspective, more from an internal perspective on the subject matter. Like I said earlier, when we started, the history and statehood of Ethiopia has been influenced by religion by and large. And as Professor Hagai reminded us when he was there in Asmara in the days of Haile Selassie, indeed the legitimacy of the rulers themselves stemmed from religion at the time. A lot has changed now. Some of it has changed. The separation and the secularity of it is still, as a principle, it has been adopted on paper and in the languages, but as a polity and as a nation, we still have a long way to embracing this. And this type of webinars, I think, will help us understand the linkages between statehood and religion, and as the state is evolving now. It's very timely to have this type of discussion. So Mahalet, again, thank you, and all the guests, thank you for giving us this insightful webinar. And hopefully we will have a second one shortly, and we'll have an insider's views of this history and perspective, and perhaps addressing also some action and solution oriented or lessons to be learned from what's happened recently, so that it doesn't repeat and puts the state or the nation at risk. Thank you, Mahalet.
Thank you. Thank you indeed for that remark. We thank you, our speakers, again for all your works that you have contributed in Ethiopian studies and continue to contribute. Thank you very much. I'm sure it's mutual. And yeah, I would like to say again, Mazal Tov or happy birthday to Professor Haggai and Shabbat Shalom, and have a good weekend or evening also to Professor Jonah Bink and all here the participants. Thank you for your time. We will have a second session. We do have also already a lineup of speakers. Yeah.
Thank you, Mahalet, for organizing.
Thank you. Have a nice.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good